Hey y'all, I'm Casey Bell of the Google Teacher Tribe podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com and get ready because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
Coming up on episode number 109 of the House of EdTech podcast, I've got an EdTech thought where we're going to talk about the power of Genius Hour. We're going to talk about replacing today's meet in the EdTech recommendation. I've got the House of EdTech VIP, and I'm welcoming my featured guests, Michelle Shelton and Cade Summers from the Across the Hall podcast. And I'll start off with this question. How many licks does it take to get to the center of the House of EdTech? Let's find out. 1, a 2, a 3, a 3. Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Chris Nessie. The House of EdTech explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. I discuss technology that is changing our classrooms and schools, and I share tools and tips that you can hear today and use tomorrow. You're going to hear the stories of teachers, leaders, and creators just like you. The purpose? Whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way you teach and how your students learn. Hey, welcome back to the House of EdTech podcast. Again, this is episode 109, and I would like to set it up that everything I talk about in this episode, you'll be able to find in the show notes over at chrisnessie.com/109. Got a jam-packed episode for you, but a couple of things before we get into the featured content. First, coming up in just a couple of weeks, I'll be presenting at Tomorrow's Classrooms Today, which is an annual conference put on by the Evolving Educators. The Evolving Educators are 3 New Jersey educators who I really admire, and they've been putting on this conference for the last 4 years. And huge shout out, as always, to Billy Krakauer, Brad Curry, and Scott Rocco, who are the Evolving Educators. This year's conference will again be at Rider University here in Jersey, and I'm looking forward to presenting just in a couple of weeks on Saturday, May 19th, and I'll be doing a session called How to Support That Teacher. And after I give that presentation, I will be talking about the topic of that presentation in an upcoming episode here over the summer, right here on the podcast. So I'm looking forward to that. If you're going to TCT, please let me know. Reach out on Twitter at Mr. Nessie, and I would look forward to meeting you. And if you want to talk about the podcast, that would be a lot of fun. The next thing I want to talk about is EdTech sad news. It was announced recently that Today's Meet over at todaysmeet.com is going to be shutting its doors. If you're not familiar with Today's Meet was basically the alternative to bringing Twitter into your classroom and really bringing about and implementing and using the idea of the back channel. I know I used it for a number of presentations a few years ago, and would use it in my classroom when I was working in a middle school and kids didn't have Twitter. It was a great way to bring in the idea of back channeling and having just a concise amount of characters, 140. And, it is kind of sad. The founder, creator, and sole developer, James Sokol, recently put out a blog post on Medium that I will link to in the show notes, where James basically goes over why he's kind of shutting it down and gives a little inclination into what he's going to be doing next. I actually have a personal connection to Today's Meet and James, as Today's Meet was the first sponsor of the House of EdTech podcast. And when I started out, not right away, but very early on in the run, I did have James and Today's Meet as a sponsor of the podcast. And that financial support was definitely something that helped to keep the podcast going in its early stages. So I will be forever thankful and grateful for James believing in the podcast. And I had used today's meat, so it was definitely a product that I believed in. And, I'm honestly, going to be sad to see it go. But don't worry, when we get to the EdTech recommendation, we will go over a couple of replacement options if back-channeling is something that you use in your classroom or during presentations. But without further ado, let's get right into the meat and potatoes of this episode. And let's do something a little different. Let's get right into my featured conversation. And that is a conversation I had recently with Michelle Shelton and Cade Summers, who are the hosts of the Across the Hall podcast. And they both teach at Oxford High School. So they are my friends from Alabama, where I got to go in August of 2017. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Michelle Shelton and Cade Summers. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the featured content for this episode, I'm very excited to welcome to the podcast two fast friends that I was able to make. As you may recall, when I took my famed trip to Alabama and got to visit Oxford High School, I'm very excited to bring on Cade Summers and Michelle Shelton. Cade Summers is a graduate of the University of South Alabama, where he received his BS in secondary education and English language arts. Cade also has his master's in instructional design and development from the University of South Alabama College. And Michelle Shelton has a BS in secondary education from Jacksonville State University, as well as her master's and her ed specialist degree in secondary education from the University of Alabama. I consider them friends. I'm happy to be talking to them tonight via Zoom.us. We're going to talk about English language arts. We're going to talk about tools. We're going to talk about relationships with colleagues. They are also podcasters. I mentioned it before. They are the hosts of the Across the Hall podcast, and they join me right now. I feel like it's the Tonight Show, guys. Welcome, Cade Summers and Michelle Shelton.
Hey, Chris.
Hello, Nessie. Only you do not look like Jimmy Fallon.
I assume that the next part of that sentence is, I look better?
Well, okay. I have a bit of a celebrity crush on Jimmy Fallon there, Nessie. I don't know if you knew that.
I know it now, and now I don't feel as good as I did because I don't look like Jimmy Fallon. I did just get a haircut, and I do feel sort of fresh.
There you go. There you go.
You have equal celebrity status, though.
There you go. So welcome aboard, guys. How have we been? I haven't really talked to you guys in really a few months since the trip back in August, but we've talked on and off. But what's going on? How are you guys?
I'm doing great. I've had a really good year, personally and professionally. It's been a great year. I've had a great group of students. I've really enjoyed being able to teach pre-AP classes this year as regular as with standard. Just no complaints on my side. What about you?
I've had a pretty good year. It's a time in the year where I'm kind of catching my breath, and I read about, in browsing the internet and looking at my Twitter feed, I'm seeing all of these different educator experts talking about teacher burnout and how to engage students at the tail end of the year. And I'm trying to absorb all of what I can in the tips and advice as much as I can at this point in the year.
So that's Cade, and I'm retweeting those bored teacher memes of the chick that's been completely just devastated by life, and it says teacher tired or something. That's where I am right now.
She's depressing, Chris. She's depressing.
I just think it's funny that it's amazing how unstandardized our education is when, you guys are getting ready to wrap up your school year in another month, and I've got another 2 months left in mine.
Well, so that means you still have some of your energy left, whereas, we're getting to the end and the kids are getting crazier.
Let's start with some of your favorite lessons as English language arts teachers. Now, I myself, I speak the English language. I butcher it from time to time, more often than not, whether I'm speaking it or writing it. I do feel a little bit of pressure to make sure I don't embarrass myself with the use of the language here on the podcast in front of two really good English teachers. And I hope everything I said is grammatically correct.
You're doing a great job.
Let's put it this way. I do make a point when people say, how are you? I don't say good. I say, I'm well.
Well, look at you being all fancy.
I try to be fancy. Favorite lessons? Again, we're talking, I mean, it's kind of, casual conversation. Favorite lessons, tech tools you guys love in the English language arts classroom. Ladies first, gentlemen first. The floor is yours. I want you guys to share.
This year, I've really tried to branch out a little bit with my tech tools, and a lot of that actually came from the students themselves and from speaking to one of our computer science teachers, trying to venture into some new places where I've never gone before. Since I'm at Oxford now, I have a one-to-one technology, and I spent most of my career not having that. So I've been so excited about finding ways to incorporate that in my class. So whenever I offer choice, the students are using things like Tinkercad to build those 3D images, and they're using Roblox or Minecraft to create things. And it's just been a whole new world for me. Right now they're using Storyboard that, and they're using Adobe products like Illustrator and Photoshop and app smashing everything together. And it's just been really exciting to see how the students can take an idea, and so many different people come up with different ways of doing things, whether they're building a model or they're creating something digitally or they're drawing it. I have some really good artists. I'm just really enjoying having all that access to that, all the different technology.
So I totally understand using something like Storyboard that, which I'm familiar with. And obviously, I remember, having the opportunity to be, expressing myself with art and illustrations when I took, my English courses. But you mentioned something like a Tinkercad and doing some 3D modeling. How are you having students integrate 3D modeling into the English curriculum? And what are they modeling?
Fortnite is what they're doing right now. We are in a Shakespeare unit, and we're reading Romeo and Juliet. And so I was trying to think of a way to make that a little more relevant to them. I have a lot of boys this year. I have one class that 90% of them are boys. And so I was trying to think of how to make this story that is kind of known for its romantic side, even though there is a lot of conflict and fighting and death and murder and all this stuff in there. I wanted to be able to reach out to the boys, and they talk about Fortnite all the time. So I was talking to a social studies teacher that teaches 10th grade, who plays Fortnite. And I was trying to say, how can I make Fortnite and Romeo and Juliet work together? So that's what we've been doing. And they had to create images to help me visualize what their game would look like, mashing together Fortnite and Romeo and Juliet. And I said, what are some ways you could do that? And they just brainstormed a list. Tinkercad was on that list. And so some of them are building the 3D models of what a scene in the game might look like. A lot of them are using Storyboard that. I've told them if they use Storyboard that, in order to get all the creativity points on the rubric, they need to bring things in also to kind of smash it together with other things. And so they're using Adobe. I saw a couple of students using Minecraft or Roblox, and got some that are drawing, because we always seem to have somebody whose computer's messed up, or just people who are interested in drawing. And so I have some that are drawing the scenes and some that are building them in Tinkercad, and they're just doing all kind of different things. And I have so much fun just watching them as they're venturing out there and trying new things.
That sounds amazing. And, you're the first person that I'm talking to that sounds like you really effectively integrated the students' love of, again, Fortnite, which, I mean, I get on there just to go get killed. I'm not really doing anything productive. So, but I figured if that's where they're there, I need to somehow understand what they're talking about. And, so I'm messing around with it, but I haven't yet decided to bring it into the classroom or not. But now that I'm in a unit on, World War I and World War II, obviously conflict and destruction is there. So maybe there's something I can do here in my last 2 months of school that could bring that in.
That's what I'm doing here in my last month of school, bringing in Fortnite.
So, Cade, let's move across the hall. Wink, wink. So, what is something that you're doing, and is it better than what Michelle is doing? Because I guess this is a competition now.
Absolutely not. I'm glad you kind of started with her, just so you can really, in case there's ever anybody that tunes you out after like 5 minutes, they heard the really great stuff, and then you get me. But no, I told her earlier when we were discussing this that she has been incredibly creative this year from the standpoint of implementing a lot more design thinking. And she has taken the bull by the horns, so to speak, and our local school system's push to try to expose this system of thinking to our students. And to be frank, I mean, for me, there have been places where I've dabbled with it, but not nearly as well as she has with Tinkercad and a lot of the programming and use of Photoshop and Illustrator and things like that. So I got to say, like, my direction has been a little bit different, but I've still tried to utilize a ton of tech tools. So I'll give you some examples. I teach a couple of online courses. I teach a standard online and a pre-AP 10 online. Really, it's the same as what I teach in my brick and mortar classes for the most part. But some of what I present to my students online, I need to have some format. So I use a whiteboard tool. And the whiteboard tool that I use, there's one in Blackboard that I can use, which is our LMS. But at times, I actually don't really like using it as often as I like using this one called groupboard.com. And I don't remember if I came across that from another teacher or if I just was searching whiteboards online. But I came across groupboard.com, and it really opened the door for me to be able to connect that to using QuickTime as a screen capture tool and being able to create some videos for demonstrations, especially like sentence diagramming and things like that for students when they can't see me in the classroom go through things. And so it's been a fun tool just to be able to help incorporate that with screen capture and record videos that I can use as an instructional aid for students online. Also, let's see, recently my students have gotten back into blogging, which is something we did last year. And we've tried to adopt some of Joy Kerr's ideas with Genius Hour. And so they just recently read a text by Nicholas Gage, not Nicolas Cage, Nicholas Gage, called The Teacher Who Changed My Life. And so the students were to delve into the text and find something within the text topically that they could find interest in, personal interest in, and come up with inquiry questions, and then do some short-term research in, and eventually create a presentation or blog post that they can share the new information that they found. And of course, with strong motivation and interest in it, it comes out from them with great, personal investment, as opposed to this was my research topic and here's what I found. So that's been something kind of fun. I would say, like, the greatest tool though for the entire school year that I have found a lot of value in has been a digital annotation tool that I guess is, it's pretty popular now, but it's called Kami, Kami. And Michelle introduced it to me, and her husband, who's an English teacher in a nearby city, introduced it to her. But it's a Google extension, and I'm considered a Kami hero because I applied for that recognition. And so they gave me, at Kami, they gave me a year's worth of an educator subscription to it. And the kind of the cool thing about that is not only does it allow me to digitally annotate a PDF with boxes and underlines and different kinds of shapes, and of course side annotation and note taking, but the education subscription gives me audio annotation, so I can click a microphone and annotate a text next to it with an audio button, and the students can listen. And it also gives video annotation. So if I want to record myself or my students record themselves alongside their annotations, I can see a picture of them while they speak it out. And that's all really cool. And the students have really liked it. I use it with both my online and brick and mortar students. And it's kind of caught on. And I think it's a good alternative for constantly working with paper. And students like the fact that they can type faster because that's the way they text and all of that. So that's really been my breakthrough tool. I've used other things like GoFormative as well as EdPuzzle. EdPuzzle is great for asking questions alongside a video. And so I'm guessing you probably have seen that one before. It's been around for a few years.
Yeah, that's definitely a valuable tool, I think, in any subject area, and definitely for definitely social studies, math. Absolutely.
You also told me about Classroom Q, which was very
convenient
when kids are in groups. Talk about Classroom Q, because that was really cool.
Oh, yeah. I learned about Classroom Q from one of my colleagues in one of our Choice PD sessions over the holidays. And Classroom Q is a very simple tool that is basically a queue, a log of students who are desiring help. So if you're trying to keep a kind of a quiet classroom during a writing session, the students can continue to work quietly and collaboratively or whatever, however your lesson is structured, but maintain a environment where you can help individual students who are falling in an order, and they don't have to keep their hand raised the entire class time waiting on you, which I'm terrible with. I've got students across the room, and 10 minutes later they'll get frustrated and, oh, Mr. Somers, I've been raising my hand for 10 minutes and stuff like that. So it's nice because it actually gives you ranking 1, 2, 3, 4 based in the order of when they press the button to say that they needed help. And underneath the button, it's a very simple page. It's got a button and it's got a comment box. And when they press that button, they can also type in a comment saying, maybe I need help with my thesis statement, or I need help creating an assertion for my first body paragraph. And that gives me an idea, if I'm going to go to them or if they come to me, that as soon as they're approached, I know exactly what they're looking for. It saves me a little bit of time just by looking at my screen.
I tell you, based on the way you just described that, I wish that my local deli would employ that instead of pulling the little tickets out when I go to get. And that's exactly what I wanted before I was ready to order it.
Yeah, and some teachers actually use it kind of like a Family Feud situation, like in a game, where first person to click is the one called upon in a game situation. And so Classroom Q is not only for help purposes, but some people use it for even a classroom game that might be played with a couple computers set up, and the first one to hit it is the one who gets the points or whatever that's being offered.
No, that sounds really cool, and definitely some good multiple uses. Obviously, what it's intended to do, and then to find that new alternate game application for it is definitely, over the course of this year, since you guys are both tech savvy and you're integrating and doing interesting things with your lesson planning. Is there anything that you tried this year that wasn't as successful as you wanted it to be, that it's either the tool and it's not worth revisiting, or you're going to go back to it and maybe give it another chance? So I guess what I'm saying is, has tech failed you in any way? And, how are you going to go back and...
There is something that I wouldn't say it failed me. I would say I failed it. I tried this grand project where my students were supposed to create an episode of Good Mythical Morning that you might see in a setting of Fahrenheit 451. And
wow.
they could use green screen or whatever. But, Good Mythical Morning is pretty much just kind of comedy nonsense, which is in Fahrenheit 451. I would imagine that's the kind of things they would watch because they didn't want anybody thinking and having, any kind of thoughts of overthrowing the government or questioning anything. So I thought of Good Mythical Morning. So it was a good concept, and they really loved Good Mythical Morning. And they had the ability to be messy, and they had so much freedom in that. But I did not do a very good job of structuring that enough to get them to get as much meaning out of it. So I say that to say that sometimes whenever I try things, it falls flat when it comes to actually getting the learning out of it that I want them to get, because sometimes the tech takes over. And I need to do a better job of making sure that the learning is what is the ultimate goal and the ultimate outcome of the technology, and that the technology itself doesn't become so overwhelming to the project that it's all about that and not about what they were supposed to be learning, which was making a connection to the setting and also writing for an audience and a purpose. And I think that got lost a little bit in all the tech they were using.
I can totally relate to that, because last year I implemented, 20% time Genius Hour for the first time. Mm-hmm. And I definitely this wasn't so much a tech issue, but it was I gave them too much freedom, didn't have a lot of the structure, and didn't get the results I was hoping for based on saying, learn what you want to learn, show me how you learned it. And I was too vague. So as I'm getting ready to kind of do that again, I'm ready to kind of revise that approach and give them a little more structure, a little more order. So while not tech related, I can totally relate to how we plan and how we try to get the kids from point A to whatever point B might be, but how we get them there. So I'm with you on that one.
All right.
I agree with you on what you just said with Genius Hour. And that's been some of my recent experience where it seems like a good chunk of kids really grasp what I'm going after. And I spend a lot of time front loading. What does it mean to have solid inquiry? It's not, and they wait for you to think of topics. We did ours centered around something related to the text, right? So if the text is about an immigrant who came from Greece in 1939, as a result of his mother saving him and his siblings, then, they could research communist Greece. They could research, Greek culture. He had a great influential teacher. And so anyway, there's like dozens of topics, but students wait for you to say a topic, and then they'll wait for you to say a second one and a third one. And we just have the biggest time, Chris, with students, like you say, they expect more structure. And unfortunately, that's the case, because you wish you didn't need all of that structure. You wish they could do what we do pretty well, and that is dabble in what we're interested in and just go 100%, 100 miles per hour into that. But that's an unfortunate reality is, you got to, I guess, identify those that need the structure and those that don't, and really encourage those that don't need that structure to set an example and model it for those other kids. My struggle, I was trying to think while Michelle was speaking there, and I cannot think of a specific one instance, but I will say, like, I try to put so much into my Blackboard course, into my online course, to facilitate kids who are in the classroom who may forget the assignment, or who aren't in the classroom, who are at home sick or whatever. So I put everything I can in there. And because I try to use, at times I don't stick to one digital formative assessment tool, the students can kind of get swimmy faced or swimmy eyed and not really sure like which one's which. And so I embed those things into my Blackboard course. And sometimes the embed code works fantastically. And then other times where things fail is like they'll click on it and it asks for their classroom code, or it asks to log in. And those little tech glitches, those little issues can seem so small, but in the end, if you don't have like the class code right there above that embed code window or whatever, if you don't have that class code in there, I've noticed that my students, we can spin our wheels and I can lose their motivation real fast because of just the frustration with technology not working. And it can turn, into 10 or 20 minutes really quickly. And I'm diving around the room trying to help each other instead of actually doing the work that we need to be accomplishing.
I just pictured you like hopping all around the room like Tigger almost.
That's about it.
I've seen it happen. It's very similar to that.
So that's a whole lot of tools. And I don't want to say we focused on failure, because, we learn by the mistakes and, the troubles. And that certainly is a great way to model it for our kids, because nobody is successful really at everything or anything you try for the first time. So I appreciate you guys sharing a little bit of, the struggle, because the struggle is real, as we all know. But on the other side is something that is positive. And what I'd like to hit on now, if you guys are cool with it, is the positive relationships that need to be formed, must be formed. There's no debate in my mind that, when we're working in a school, and I've talked about this before on the show, the human element, most recently with my dad, and that's, it's lost, I think, or it's becoming faded, and when I came to your school, I saw a lot of positivity, teachers collaborating. You have your innovation station which there's a room in my school that is 20 feet from my classroom that I wish I could go and make the same thing and, get the wall paint and be able to write on the wall. It's not as big as yours, but I would love to see some of that. And I know this year in my building, we don't get to see a lot of our colleagues. I got the impression when I met you guys in your school that you can kind of see each other and do things and interact. And, it is really promoted to collaborate and develop these positive relationships. And you guys, while I don't think you're literally across the hall anymore, wink, wink again, but people will know where we're going in a second. But you two have a great relationship, or you're really putting on a great show. But I think you guys have a great relationship as people in the same department. How important is that to you guys, and what does it mean to you to have that great working relationship with colleagues in your building?
I'll go ahead and start. The relationship is what makes you want to keep your job. What makes you want to stay at Oxford, for example. And our format right now, started this year, is every day we have a first period collaborative planning time. And usually it's pretty highly structured. There is a teacher leader. Actually, we have a group of teacher leaders called innovation teachers, and they're responsible each day for kind of guiding us into the topic of the day or the thing that we're working on. It may be an action plan. It may be a CFA. It may be grading CFAs. It may be, like today, it was a little bit more choice. We got to learn a little bit about more about learning targets, or more about success criteria, or daily formative assessment tools or methods, things like that. But it is nice, but it can easily be taken for granted because of the fact that it is the nature of PD. There's unfortunately always going to be, no matter how exciting or how innovative the idea is, that PD is work. It is grueling sometimes, but to have any other situation, I think I would be highly disappointed. I love the fact that not only I get to talk to Michelle on a daily basis, but we, in that first period or between periods, or I see her at lunch, we get to sit and discuss things that are working, things not working, and then not just us, but other teachers of our department. We see them so often, and even share on our teams now. Many of us share the same common planning time, which is a different time of the day, which is great. So all that to say, even on the down days, if we look at it from a great positive viewpoint, it's nice to have people who share like successes as well as those like struggles. And if we couldn't even talk about those things and work together through those things, I can't really imagine how stressful my end of the year would be.
I get so much of my energy from my colleagues, from people like Cade and just the ladies that work around me. And he's got a great brand new teacher across the hall from him that teaches social studies. And he's the one that kind of helped me out with that Fortnite idea. And just being able to bounce ideas off of my colleagues is one of the most exciting things about my job. And we are so isolated, I guess, the majority of the day, because we're in there with all these teenagers all the time. And if we didn't have each other, we would, I'm pretty sure, go insane. So it's nice to build those relationships, and to even when things go badly, or when someone's having a bad attitude, like people tend to do, just kind of rolling with it. And even through that, learning how to deal with each other and build each other up and try to get everybody's attitude back in the right direction. And it becomes a family. And
on those days, we recall a time when this wise podcaster came from New Jersey to visit us and shine a beacon of light and hope. We just finished those days and times we walk away from each other by saying, have an Oxford day.
Yes, everybody's still using it. They're still using it, Nezzy.
It's on the weekly student newscast.
I I've told the story here, when I reflected on my trip, and I mean, that that leaves me speechless. And I was just on a whim there in the main office making the announcements.
And all the students in my classroom are like, who in the world is this guy? and then it's just like this weird, cackling at Have an Oxford Day. And then from that point forward, you would just hear like these random kids in the hallway, like joking to each other, saying it.
I remember, again, being in the main office, the young lady's name, she's a senior, Mindy, I don't know her last name, but she was doing the announcements that day, and she was like, can I use that? I was like, what are you talking about? She goes, I love having Oxford Day. I'm like, sure, go ahead. So that's been, it's cool. And definitely it speaks to your culture. And I came up with that being there for like a half hour. And, over the course of the day to see what you guys are doing. And you say, I'm the beacon. I left thinking, how can I convince my wife to move to Alabama because I want to work here?
Well, that's great. I'm glad that you had a good experience.
We wouldn't mind you in Alabama.
I would have to clean a few things up. Here we go. Let's move into the last part of today's conversation. And as I introduced you guys, I mentioned that you are the co-hosts of the Across the Hall podcast. So why don't we start with what is the Across the Hall podcast? And let's talk about geeky podcast stuff, because I know there are people in my audience who love to talk about or hear me talk about geeky podcasting stuff.
All right, Michelle, you got it.
No, I was like, Cade tells this story so much better than I do. So I was totally trying to give him the face, but he didn't get it.
Oh, I change the story every time just for fun. And because I don't remember.
If you can throw a penguin in there, that'd be great.
A penguin?
Yeah, a couple penguins. Throw them in there.
They might have been there. All right. So basically, Michelle and I are teaching on the same floor a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now. And it was her first year at our high school, but her 14th year teaching, Michelle. So she comes from another nearby high school, remaining unnamed, where she really enjoyed her career, but came at a time when she was a little bit depressed, a little bit disheartened by the way things were going there professionally and that kind of thing, regardless of the fact that she was an awesome teacher there. So she comes to Oxford and she has this renewed spirit, seeing the cohesiveness that you saw when you came to Oxford, and basically says to me about November, December, wouldn't it be cool to have a podcast? I think that's basically how it got started. But every single day, we would talk to each other about things we're doing. And it really started out day one, though, didn't it, Michelle? So I forgot something. Like I'm always this creepy, won't leave you alone sort of person that introduces himself. I'm a super extrovert. And that's
a great way to introduce yourself, as the creepy guy.
Yeah, I am. So she's in there, and I'm like, she's a new teacher. She has no idea how to connect all these things, and it's my third year, so I'm now an expert. So I asked her if she needed help connecting parts of her computer, and after the custodial staff and all these kids had waxed the floor and all this stuff. So I offered to do that, and she's like, I think I got it. I'm pretty good at all this. And I'm like, oh, fine, I'll leave you alone. I kind of got the hint. Anyway, we developed a relationship, and by the end of the year, around November, she mentioned the podcast idea. And this started then with us just using our phones to start listening to some podcasts. And I have a list of some of my favorite ones, and I started listening to some of those, and I'm like, I think we could do this. She suggested it kind of tongue-in-cheek, I think. And I said, well, I think that'll be kind of fun. So from there, within just a matter of about 5 months, right? Because I think our first episode was around June of last year. Is that right, Michelle?
It was.
And so we were across the hall from each other. And the idea behind that was, ELA teachers specifically, but any teacher, our first resource is not going to Google. Our first resource is not an email to an administrator. Our first resource is the teacher. Even if a class is going on, something's not going right, we'll say, hey, y'all sit down or stop hanging from the ceiling, rafters or whatever. Just for a second, I got to go talk to Michelle or Miss Shelton. And
get off the top.
That's the way the relationship developed.
they told me whenever they were walking me through the halls after I got hired, I think that the exact words were, "This is Cade Summers' room. He walks on water." And then just kept walking down the hallway. And so I didn't even know who this person was going to be. And they said, if you need any help with anything, just ask Cade. And everybody just kept saying, ask Cade. If you need any help with anything, ask Cade. So I was like, I hope this Cade person is decent, because I'm apparently going to have to talk to him a lot. So luckily,
other people say no. That is one of my tragic flaws, is the inability to say no, Michelle.
Well, I also have that inability. Just today, I was telling my students, I said, there's the possibility you could have Mr. Summers next year, and he's basically the man form of me. So good luck with that.
Wait, I should have realized this when we started. So let me reintroduce Cade real quick, and it starts with this.
Exactly.
Hey, Chris, I'm sorry that I arrived to today's episode late. I was at church. I just wanted to.
That is fabulous. That's basically what I hear in my head when he walks in a room or something. Just a man walking on water. Oh, goodness.
Every time Cade Summers gives a lesson, angels get wings.
Oh, man.
Pretty much that's how that goes. So anyway, he thought a lot like me, which is kind of scary that there's anybody else out there that would think like me. And we just, I always throwing ideas back and forth and bouncing ideas back and forth. And just, he was talking about podcasts. I think he actually was talking about some man podcast. What were you listening to?
The Art of Manliness. It is still just so awesome to listen to.
And so I started listening to the Google Teacher Tribe, actually. And I think what even made me consider it was that Matt Miller's from Indiana. And that kind of made me think about Cade. And I was like, we could do a podcast. But still, I was just kidding. And so whenever I said it, and he was like, okay. I was like, you've got to be kidding me, right? We're going to do a podcast. Have you heard my Southern accent? But anyway, the rest is history, I guess. But we just wanted to have a place where we could talk about ways to use strategies and technology in English class, because so many times I've gone into professional development, some kind of training, and come out of there thinking, okay, that sounds great, but how in the world am I supposed to use that in my class? That sounds great for science. That sounds great for math. How in the world am I supposed to use that in an English class? So that was kind of our original purpose, was just to talk about, okay, this is what you keep hearing about. Here's how you can use it in English class. So that was the goal.
And more than anything, it was just for us to improve ourselves. Just recently we interviewed Rich Chiz, author of 4 O'Clock Faculty, and just digging in a little bit to PD ideas. It's interesting, having a podcast is your own personal PD time. And so it was really just all about, and Chris, I'm sure this is what you do it for, or at least started out doing it for also, is you want to make yourself better. And so by reaching out to all of these people like Chris Nesi and others, we end up developing ourselves as teachers. And so number one, it makes us better for our students. But number two, it allows us, just if we're going to learn it, we might as well pass it on.
We learned that hard way. Whenever we interviewed Dan Rotter, that was episode 2 or 3. It was pretty early on. We were interviewing him to talk about maker spaces, and he talked about design thinking a lot, and we had not really heard much about design thinking. So before we could even finish talking in our episode, we had to go and research it and figure out what in the world is this design thinking thing he keeps talking about. And so we learned so much just through, oh no, we have to be able to say something about design thinking. And so we had, we had a teacher in the building who had been actually a Teachers Guild fellow and knew all about design thinking. We went to her and she gave us a crash course on design thinking. And I immediately was like, how can I use this in my classroom? And
you can mention Teresa by name.
Teresa Stadricks, T-Stad. She's Teachers Guild fellow through audio. And so, of course, that's who I went to and said, hey, I'm going to need you to teach me about this design thinking so that we can finish this podcast. So she came in and she and Cade and I just had an awesome pop-up PD right there in the innovation station that day so that we could even finish talking for the rest of that episode. So it's been such a learning experience and fun, and it's things that we're interested in. So it's something that we're going to dive into, and we're going to dig into it, and we're going to use it in our classrooms. And it's been the best professional development that I've ever had. We met you, Chris Nessie. You live in New Jersey. I've never even been to New Jersey. How does this happen? It's been such an amazing experience to meet all these wonderful educators and people who have such wonderful ideas.
Yeah, we call those because of my podcast stories. So again, because of my podcast, I got to go to Alabama.
Right. Alabama. Yay. Because
it's amazing that you could go into a Twitter chat and engage with a moderator. Think of some of the people you've gotten to talk to that, you could buy their book, whether it's like a Rich Chiz or other people you guys have had on. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, we want to talk to you. We're going to interview you. Who doesn't want to promote or be promoted? So it's a good tool, and it's a good way to say, hey, I want to learn from you. Here's the value I can add. I'm going to share it. And, that's great for educators.
Right. It's been such a wonderful experience. And because of our podcast, Angela Stockman even put me in her book. I'm like, what? I'm in a book? I've never been in a book. I was so excited.
That was really awesome. And I got to say, because Angela Stockman put Michelle in her book, I got put in her book. It said, with co-host Cade Summers.
Yeah.
No, major props to Michelle, because she actually contributed all these ideas she's doing in her classroom. I didn't do anything, and I still got in there.
You just rode the coattails, Cade. You rode the coattails. It's okay.
Now, do you guys, and I hope you do, but do you consider yourselves full-fledged, hey, we're podcasters?
A little bit. I think I do. I think I'm at that point where I feel like I'm an official podcaster. Yeah. Probably around the point, I can't even talk today. We had Dave Burgess on. Might have been the time that I was finally like, this is it.
I have arrived. I'm doing it.
I had the pirate on. I have arrived.
There are times in the waning hours of an evening when I'm tired of everything else going on that I might go occasionally to Twitter and see the mentions of our Twitter handle and just find out who out there has done something. And it's amazing to me to see people from British Columbia, Canada, and other parts of the world outside of the United States. It's surprising to me to see somebody in Kentucky, let alone, Canada, sharing something that we have offered. I'll speak for myself, Michelle, I know you too, but we have so much more to learn and so many more ways to grow. But for other people to tap into something we've offered and to say it's credible and useful and it helped them in their classroom is very humbling.
I'll just say that whenever I don't feel like there's more to learn, I'm done, because learning is one of the things I really like about the job. It's just the constant need to learn and keep up to date. But when Matt Miller listed us as like one of the top 20 podcasts, I was like fangirling. I was, what? We made Matt Miller's list because he was the one originally. It was his podcast that I was that got me excited about it. So I was super pumped. I think I called Cade or texted him with like all caps. Matt Miller listed us. I'm just so excited that he put us on the list.
Yeah. Nice. And I found out that Matt Miller's mom went to the same high school that I went to, which was kind of cool. He's a fellow Hoosier.
Indiana forever. Why don't we tell people where they can go find the Across the Hall podcast? I mean, I've mentioned it before, but hey, let's hit them again. So where can we find the show? Where can they subscribe? How do we get there?
All right. You can access us on the internet at acrossthehallpodcast.com. You can also find us in iTunes, and you can find us in Google Play. Also, our Twitter handle is at Across the Hall, where the O in across is a 0.
Very cool. And now, so that's how people can get to the podcast, which is 100% worth your subscribing to and checking out what Cade and Michelle are putting out on a fairly regular basis. And how can my listeners get in touch with both of you as the host of the show?
You can contact me on Twitter at shellshell617. I have a blog, bloggingintherain.wordpress.com. And Cade, what about you?
And my Twitter handle is at Cade Summers. And my blog is smore, SMORE, English.edublogs.org.
Nice. There will be a link to everything that we've talked about in the show notes for this episode, which I think will be chrisnessy.com/109. There's going to be a very quick turnaround time on this conversation. As there's 108 episodes out, so we're going to go with 109. So chrisnessy.com/109 will get you links to Cade and to Michelle and to the Across the Hall podcast and all of the great resources that they shared. Did you guys have fun here on the House of EdTech?
So much fun. Thank you so much for inviting us to be on here.
Yes, definitely. It is always an honor.
And this is a first. We've never been on someone else's podcast.
And don't hang up on us, Chris, without us telling you have an Oxford day.
Of course not. I there's a whole series of promos we have to go through and record now.
Okay.
So thank you again, guys, for coming onto the show and making time here on a random April night. I really appreciate it. You guys are welcome anytime that I invite you, which will definitely happen again in the future because you guys are great to talk to.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now it's time for this episode's House of EdTech Thought. The title of this EdTech Thought is called The Power of Genius Hour. Recently, in my freshman world history classroom, I introduced Genius Hour. 20% time, passion projects. I used the terms interchangeably, and that's exactly what I told my students. But I recently introduced this as sort of it is the culminating project for my students in my classroom this year. And again, I'm working with 9th grade world history students. So my students will have a 6-week window, which they'll use to complete a passion project of their choosing. Now, this, in my opinion, and I know a lot of people will share this opinion, I think this is a really powerful concept. I present it to my students as an opportunity to, for the first time, most likely in their 8, 9, 10 years of schooling, depending on how young they were when they started, as an opportunity to learn what they want to learn, choose how they want to learn it, and decide how they're going to show me that they learned or are learning. And I think that there's nothing greater. And I really wish with something like this that I was a student today in school. Now, granted, as an adult, I have the ability to choose what I want to learn, how I want to learn it, and that's kind of the approach I take to professional development. But for students, I think it's really a great exercise in creativity. And I pitch it to them as, somewhere early in your academic career, your creativity really got stripped. And whether it's school or society, your creativity gets stripped away and crushed to some degree, because whether you work with middle school students or high school students or, college students or even adults, sometimes getting people to be creative is, more challenging than pulling teeth if you're a dentist. But for you elementary school teachers who are listening, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, you're really still working with kids who are free and really not held back by their inhibitions. And, they will give you the quote unquote crazy idea or solution, to a problem or answer to a question. And it's really, really uninhibited. And it's something that does get lost as students get older. And I ask my students, what are the things you remember most about kindergarten? And the top 3 answers we came up with were snack time, nap time, and playtime. And then I'm able to joke with them once they come to that conclusion as a class that they, as freshmen, still try to take naps during the day in high school. They still need to have their snack time. If you teach middle school or high school, you've had students maybe who, will show up with the occasional untoasted Pop-Tart
or some other snack that they, just need to eat right then and there. So they need to get snack time. And, for my students, and maybe yours too, they're still trying to play games. It might be Fortnite as opposed to going off and playing with the blocks and the trucks, but we're still looking for those three things. And I let them know this year as I introduced it that even I, as a 37-year-old, still look for those three things, and how, on my 2-hour prep and lunch combination, I will some days look to close my eyes for 10 to 15 minutes and try to get nap time. I obviously, bring lunch and will sometimes have a snack during the day. So I am still looking for snack time. And in terms of playtime, I too have playtime. And on my prep and lunchtime, I will spend some time with Bowtie Joe Juba, who was a former guest of the show. I will go over to Joe's classroom and we will play some board games. The board game of choice right now is Blockus, which will be a recommendation and something I talk about in a future episode because I'm addicted. But Joe and I will play Blockus with some of his students, and it's playtime. But getting back to the idea of, Genius Hour, it's a great opportunity that's really powerful, and I believe that it can potentially change a student's life because I am pushing them, forcing them out of their comfort zone. They're going to be having websites and blogs, and I let them know, and to see the surprise on some of their faces about how, wait, my learning is going to be shared with who? And I tell them it's not just for me and, my in-class support teacher or the kids in their class. They're going to be sharing their learning with the world. And I cannot wait to be tweeting their blogs and their posts and their projects because, as I tell them, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I may not know or have any interest in what they want to learn, but I might be able to most likely connect them with somebody who can. So they've been encouraged to go home and, talk with their families about this project, start to reach out to people and just come up with even the most outlandish idea, but to just kind of put yourself out there and take advantage of what I think is a really great opportunity. Now, some people might say, but this is history. This has nothing to do with history or world history. But in my opinion, and agree or disagree, and I think many people would agree, it sure is social studies, because the idea, whether it's my class or a science class or a math class, my goal really is, again, I'm not preparing you to play Jeopardy or memorize names and dates. If that's going to be your thing, make that decision later. You're not making that decision, as a middle school student or even in high school, how into history, you want to be. Now, granted, there are some kids that do that, and that's fine. But my goal is leave my classroom a better person and one day be an even better contributor to society. And I really think that Genius Hour, 20% time passion projects will empower students to do that. And that's why I've kind of geared them up this whole year to get to this point and be able to embark on this project and exercise in, again, creativity and kind of exploring and getting to know who they are even more. We all know that, kids coming out of middle school, that's an awkward time. Going into high school can still be awkward as you transition from being the quote unquote little kid to being more of an adult. And, how I treat and interact with my students has changed over the course of the year as I push them more towards adulthood. But giving them this opportunity and really empowering them to take full advantage of it is, again, it is so valuable. And I know that some kids are going to miss the opportunity, but I know that even if one or two take advantage of it, then it is completely worth it. Because even the ones who quote unquote miss the opportunity now, at some point they'll look back and they'll realize, wow, that was an opportunity. And maybe the next opportunity that comes to them, they will take advantage of. So if you've ever considered integrating this type of project or this type of learning into your classroom, like I say with technology, hey, just give it a try. What's the worst thing that happens? I don't have an answer for that question. But if you are somebody who has tried Genius Hour, or you're using it and you've had success with it, or if you've had failure with it, I'd love to hear your comments and feedback. So go to chrisnessy.com/feedback or leave a comment on the show notes for this episode over at chrisnessy.com/109. And let's continue to learn and talk about the power of Genius Hour. That is my EdTech thought. And now for this episode's EdTech recommendation. As I mentioned at the top of this episode, Today's Meet is shutting down relatively soon here in May of 2018. But fear not, there are a number of replacements out there for you to consider. And I'd like to recommend two to you right now as a Today's Meet replacement. The first is Tozzle, Tozzl. And Tozzle is a chat platform that allows you to quickly create private, password-protected message boards, as well as public message boards. To get started, you can visit Tozzle's website at tozzle.com, and you can simply select Create New Tozzle. Then you can name your message board and set a privacy password, which again is optional, and Tozzle assigns a new, unique URL to each message board. On your message board, you can add sections for chat, file sharing, to-do lists, and YouTube videos. You can also import the feed of a Twitter hashtag onto your Tozzle boards. So again, one potential option to replace Today's Meet will be Tozzle. And again, go to tozzl.com. There'll be a link in the show notes. And the other is, of course, a great option for a number of things, even though were in the news, a few weeks ago, Padlet. Padlet, in its recent update, added the template or the theme, whatever you want to call it, of a back channel as a feature. So I think that this would also be obviously useful as a back channel replacement for a back channel tool like Today's Meet. So check out Padlet.com. And again, with the things going over on at Padlet, you can, as a new user, you can create up to 3 Padlets. Some of you may have more if you're a longtime user, but consider using Padlet as a replacement for Today's Meet in your classroom. And again, I'm sorry to see Today's Meet go, but hey, education is going to march on, and the idea of the back channel, new tools will rise up. So check out Tozzle, check out Padlet. If there's another tool that you're going to be using to replace Today's Meet, hey, let me know in the comment on the show notes over at chrisnessy.com/109, or share it on Twitter and use the hashtag HouseOfEdTech. And now it's time for this episode's House of EdTech VIP. Congratulations to Jessica Lemo. Jessica is from Baltimore, and Jess strives to build a generation of young people with the skills, knowledge, and understanding to succeed in college, careers, the community, and to be all-around upstanding digital citizens and learners. Jess works to provide support to school personnel and curriculum instruction staff by integrating technology into activities into the school and to improve instruction and student achievement. Jess is on Twitter, so please go out and connect with Jess. She is at Jessica Lemo, and that's JessicALEMMO. Connect with Jess, and congratulations to you, Jessica. You are the House of EdTech VIP. Thank you for checking out this episode of the House of EdTech podcast. Thanks again to Michelle and Cade. Be sure to check out the Across the Hall podcast. There'll be a link in the show notes for this episode, out at chrisnessy.com/109, where I would also love it if you shared your thoughts on everything that we talked about in the conversation, or from the recommendation, or even my EdTech thought on Genius Hour. Would love to continue that conversation. You can also share some feedback by going to chrisnessy.com/feedback. Now, if you enjoy the House of EdTech podcast, hey, thank you. I'm so glad that you listen to the podcast and you have made it a part of your anytime, anywhere professional development. If you could do me a favor, I would love it if you told somebody else about the podcast. Share me on social media. Use the hashtag House of EdTech. House of EdTech is also on Twitter, as am I. And the House of EdTech is also on Instagram at, you guessed it, House of EdTech. Another way you can help the show out is you could also become an awesome supporter. Right now, I'd like to thank my current awesome supporters. So many thanks to Eric Kurtz from ControlAltAchieve.com, Dan Gallagher, Peggy George from Classroom 2.0 Live, Jen Giffen from the Shooks and GIF podcast, which you can find at bit.ly/ShooksandGIF, Mark Grindell, Jeff Herb over at InstructionalTechTalk.com, Mike Messner, JP Prezavento over at jpprez.com. And actually, JP is now involved with a podcast called the EdTech Pod Squad. So make sure you check that out. Flipgrid Guru Extraordinaire, the awesome Scott Titmus. Make sure you connect with Scott. And Brent Warner from the EdTech.tv podcast. Thank you guys and gals for all of your support. If you are interested in supporting the podcast, go over to chrisnessy.com/awesome. The next episode of the House of EdTech will be episode 110. And that's going to come out on May 20th, 2018. I would tell you what's going to be in that episode, but I'd like it to be a surprise. We're getting here near the end of the year, so Genius Hour is happening in my classroom, and, well, we're going to figure out what we're going to talk about in the next episode. Well, I already know, but again, I want it to be a surprise to you. Also change things up here a little bit, moving around some of the content. Let me know what you think. If you get this far, obviously, that's cool. Until next time, thank you for learning with me, and remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try. The House of EdTech is a proud member of Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here. For more great content, go to voiceed.ca. The House of EdTech is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. The Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more, go to edupodcastnetwork.com.